to our stand-up for education Fringe. It's great to see so many people here. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers. Just before we move on to them, my name's Chris and I work for the NUT. Just a bit of housekeeping. We've got photographer Vicky, who's going to be popping in and out taking photos. So if you'd rather she didn't take a picture of you, could you just let her know and she'll make sure you're not in the shop. So what we're going to do, we're going to hear from the speakers first. We've got 3 speakers. They're going to be asked to speak for up to 7 minutes each, and then we'll go over to you to hear your thoughts. So without any further ado, our first speaker is our president, Max Hyde. Max is a mother, a grandmother, a teacher, and a trade unionist, which are 4 very important roles. Max studied molecular science at Warwick and has been a teacher of physics and chemistry since 1977. Max is also a science ambassador. Max has been an activist in the NUT for as long as she's been teaching, and she's very, very proud indeed to have become the NUT's president earlier this year. So Max, over to you.
In true trade union style, this is one microphone for all. It is a great pleasure to be here. We value tremendously the support from the Green Party. And when I was looking at the news this morning before coming, and it led with the fact that you got a vegan stall in the conference rather than some of the more political announcements by Natalie, I thought, well, actually, this is quite good because not only is the Green Party the one that has clear green water between it and all the other parties, but of course, I am absolutely certain that the Green Party contains nuts, this sort of nut, of course. Chris has introduced me, and I am proud to be a teacher and a trade unionist, but I'm a teacher. I'm not a paid official, I'm a teacher. But of course, Mr. Gove had a conference on educational reform, strangely timed just before the last day of strike action that the NUT did, or took in, along with some other public sector unions. And our target is Mr. Gove, of course, because he was the problem and the policies of the Conservative Party enacted in the Condemn coalition are the problem. And what he said about me was not, well done you for teaching all these years. Thousands of children. I hope, and my aim is to enhance their life chances. What he said and what he typified the work of the NUT as was opposition by vested interests, determined to hold back reform, insisting things must stay the same. Well, of course, he said that, and then shortly afterwards, he wasn't the Secretary of State, of course. And he says that, Mr. Cameron says, that he hasn't been put into a back seat. But I say, being shoved into a lower profile position and having a pay cut of £36,000, whilst it doesn't solve the problems, certainly gave teachers heart just before the summer holiday. On your seats, unless you're over there, and we'll come and give you these, because we didn't like to pretend that we were wildly optimistic, but I'm really pleased you're sitting over there, but we'll give you a copy of our manifesto, which we want you to take out as our friends and promote along with your own. It says various things, and I know that you can read, because you've been educated by teachers and by parents. So I know you can read, so I'm not going to parrot all of it, but I am going to say various things. It is all around the Stand Up for Education campaign. This has been a magnificent campaign in my own view. It's the right campaign in my own view, because what we're seeking to do is to engage with the public, the wider profession, and to actually tell them why we hold this opposition, because they're too damn right. We are opposing reforms because they're the wrong reforms and that they're having the wrong effects on our young people. So of course we oppose them. But we're not just talking in negative terms. We're saying we have a better vision and we want to engage with politicians. And I'm very grateful for the profile that the Green Party has over the years given, for example, to opposition to meaningless tests. Now, of course, I have always had my results in the public domain. I've been a secondary school teacher, so A-levels, O-levels when I started off, and CSEs, and then GCSEs, their results have always been in the public domain, and I would have told people anyway. But what we're faced with now is a battery of tests. There are even more tests. On the 15th of July, the website of the government, the GovUK website, actually said, and this gives you the government's thinking and the spin that they put upon it, it actually said, we've introduced new tests to eradicate illiteracy and innumeracy. This is so insulting on every possible level. It's not the tests that raise educational standards. It's being taught by qualified teachers every lesson of every day that raises educational standards.
Yeah.
I don't see how having ever increasing numbers of unqualified teachers, particularly in free schools where more than 13% of the workforce in free schools are not qualified teachers, how can this make things better? What it does is makes things cheaper, and that's wrong. Education should not be for sale. It should not be privatised, and you'll hear more about this. Education is the most important weapon you can use to change the world. That's Nelson Mandela, late great and honorary member of the NUT, said that, and he's right. And so capital, so big businesses are seeking to privatise education, not for the benefit of your children or grandchildren. They're seeking to privatise it to make money. And if the Conservative Party gets in next time, we will be seeing schools run for profit. And we have seen in Sweden the absolute chaos that that leads us to. The testing is completely wrong that they're doing. I believe in testing. I have always tested my pupils, but I've tested them at a time that I felt was appropriate in the pattern of work that I was doing. I've tested them in a way that I feel is appropriate. And another hero of mine, Albert Einstein, said, if you ask a fish to climb a tree, it will spend the rest of its entire life feeling that it's stupid and a failure. And that's what we're doing to our children. For God's sake, they've actually introduced synthetic phonics. I don't know a single primary teacher who did not have phonics as part of their repertoire in teaching reading. But it wasn't the only way. And sometimes it's not the best way for a particular pupil. But they aren't allowed to make professional judgments. And so what we do now is we test nonsense. In testing synthetic phonics, artificial bits of words that have no meaning, we are testing nonsense instead of concentrating on promoting a love of learning, a love of reading. And that's why we oppose it. We think that schools should be ready for children and not the other way around. The early years curriculum is being sent down a particular path because Liz Truss, when she was going around a nursery school, thought that the children were running about a bit too much rather than sitting behind desks. She doesn't know what 3 and 4 year olds are like, nor does she know how you prepare them for all the intensive learning that goes on in schools. Nursery school teachers knew, but now they're being told to do something different. And this denigration, this removal of the professionalism of teachers, is actually having a really bad effect in that fewer are going into the profession and we're losing them. It's not so much a leaky pipeline as beginning to gush. We're losing young teachers. What a waste. They're the future. Their enthusiasm. They want to teach. and we're losing them. Teachers in the middle of their profession are saying, I can't imagine going on and on until I'm 68. And quite rightly so too, or beyond. You know, those of you who know the intensive nature of teaching know that if a teacher is able to do it, they're fantastic, but most won't be able to do it, and they'll be hounded out of the profession by misuse of capability procedures. And this is a grave worry. My children were taught by qualified teachers all the way through their profession, all the way through their schooling, from the nursery school through to post-16. And I want my grandchildren to be taught by qualified teachers all the way through their schooling. Nothing less will do. And so we say to you, stand up for education, speak up for education. Education is important, and your voices are absolutely crucial in this fight. Thank you very much.
Too many. That's right. Okay. Well, first of all, I've really got to begin by saying thank you to the NUT for being here today. It's absolutely great to see you here, and it was. And it was also great to be down at the NUT conference in that lovely place that most of us know pretty well called Brighton, where we had a Green Party Fringe at NUT conference, which I believe was the first time ever. So that's, I hope, we're really building a stronger relationship, and that's very important to us, because one of the things that you'll have been noticed in the last couple of days, any of you who've been watching media coverage, although we've been banging on for years about a whole lot of different issues, I still get the, you're talking about something, but the environment. You're not just talking about polar bears. And one of the things that we have a lot to say about, and we agree with the NUT on practically everything, is about education. But it's very hard often for us to get some attention to be able to get into the mainstream media on that. So one of the things that I've been doing is I've tried to give speeches on education, which you'll find on the Green Party website. I've written blogs for the Huffington Post about education, and we really want to get that out there and have the story, because as in so many other areas, we have an utterly unique, different approach to the three business as usual parties on education, as in so many other areas. And I thought I'd use my 7 minutes to briefly, perhaps not everyone in the room kind of knows what our education policies are, so I thought I'd do a very brief overview of that. But before I did that, I did just want to start a little by reflecting on what you said about in terms of the retirement age. Because I'm actually a school governor, and so I have some outside but close knowledge of what it's like to be a teacher and the amount of energy that it involves. And I think there is some comparison to sort of keeping the attention and keeping the interest of a group of sort of 37-year-olds. It's probably about like keeping the attention of the entire national media audience when you're doing a speech, like I was yesterday. It's something that takes a lot of energy, a lot of concentrated effort, and to expect people to do that into their late 60s is a very big ask. But to do some sort of overview of Green Party education policy, I'm going to start with something that Caroline's doing a lot of work on in Parliament at the moment, which is, as you put it, a wider vision of learning and achievement. What I talk about often is education for life. Caroline's doing a lot of work on sex and relationship education and how we desperately need decent sex and relationship education in our schools. As an old feminist, that was my first politics. It's an issue close to my own heart. But it's much broader than that, because schools also need to make sure pupils have got skills about things like nutrition, cooking, eating, maybe even growing food, information about knowing how finance works, the whole payday loan issue. So we need schools that educate the whole pupil. And of course, this teaching to the test, pushing children through the sausage machine, I spend a lot of time talking at university audiences, and indeed sixth form audiences of sixth forms. And there's a bit of a contest really, because of course when I say we want zero tuition fees, I get a very big cheer. But actually when I say we want to stop education being like a sausage machine that shoves you through the machine, I usually get almost as big a cheer as zero tuition fees. Young people who are in the system now really entirely know and get that they're just being treated like a product that has to be pushed out to the maximum possible level. And I know what happens as a school governor. A whole school can get practically focused. Almost every effort is focused on there's 3 pupils we've got to get over level 4 in maths, because otherwise Ofsted will be on our tail. And if you just think about the huge distorting impact that has on the education system, it's just absolutely awful. So that is, and of course underlying that is the whole league table issue and why schools are being pushed into that, being compared on league tables on results. And here I particularly want to highlight the really excellent work that's been done in Brighton and Hove with the Green Council there, because they've taken, and Sue Shanks is up there, almost hiding behind the other people up there, they've taken the approach of saying schools should work together to get the best outcome for every pupil. This isn't a competition. Schools shouldn't be competing against each other, but working together. And the results are demonstrable. GCSE results in Brighton and Hove, which has traditionally been a real struggle in the city, have improved significantly. And that's a track record. And when, as I find myself saying quite often in the national media, I'm proud of the record of the Brighton and Hove Green Council, the GCSE results is one of the things that I point to. And that sort of brings me on to the next point of what you described as our fractured education system. And the Green Party has always been opposed to academies under Labor and certainly to free schools now. And I think one of the things that I think is really, I've been trying to get some real traction on this issue, and I haven't yet, but I'm going to keep trying, is the fact behind that idea of competition, behind the idea of setting up all these extra schools, is the idea that some of them are going to fail. And if you think about, the classic capitalists, and I entirely agree that the whole aim of this ultimately is to bring, bring profit-making companies into schools. If you have the comparable widget factories, if you have 10 widget factories and 5 of them fail, well, it's unfortunate for workers in some of the widget factories, but maybe they go and work in another widget factory or do something else, and that's, how capitalism works. But if you think about with free schools, and just one free school fails, we have an education system in which children's progress is very tied to age. And if your education is disrupted because your school fails, or indeed, as we've seen, in some cases, the new school you were going to go to never starts, that kind of chaos, that's going to have a real long-lasting, possibly even lifelong impact on your life, that you've been in the middle of that competition and whichever school your parents or you chose failed and you lost out. And of course the impact stretches beyond even that one school, because that school fails, is closed down, and the pupils are distributed all round into the following area, into the surrounding area. And so what you've got is then disruption of the education of all those other pupils, because I know as a governor that a school really is a community, and that community is very tight-knit. People know each other, they relate to each other, and you throw a whole lot of new pupils into that mix, and it's disruptive. No matter how well the head teacher, the teachers manage it, it's going to be disruptive. So that in terms of, we are opposed to free schools and academies. We want, as I said in the speech yesterday, democratically run community schools, and we want pupils to go to a local school. The idea is the school should be part of the community. And it was interesting actually, because I often talk about the impacts of the situation where parents crisscross, very often driving because their kids aren't going to the school in a town, crisscrossing, so you have the school run and the amazing traffic jams of the school run. And I was in Bath, and they tell me, and I think I believe them, that Bath is currently the perfect example of this. They have the best school run traffic jams anywhere in the country. So if you know anywhere that rival that, do come and talk to me later. But I've been given the 1 minute thing, so I do want to finish on one really important point, which is perhaps the most pernicious aspect of the way this government is approaching education, and there's lots of things to choose from, is the fact, and actually in truth the last Labor government was doing it too, the claim that somehow you can have large numbers of children living in poverty, in worsening poverty, and somehow the school can just sort it all out.
Yeah.
And you think about this, and the bedroom tax is a wonderful example. So you're saying that, I've heard of cases of 4 children of the same gender can share a bedroom. But let's take the more typical 2. 2 children of the same gender can share a bedroom. And you've got a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old. Where's the 9-year-old going to do their homework? Where's the quiet space in the house, the personal space where they can put their books, put their stuff, have the space? And in that bedroom of tax-affected household, can they really afford broadband internet connection that you need to do your homework? Can they afford an iPad, probably a new iPad or similar every couple of years? Of course they can't. And no matter how brilliant schools are, they're not going to be able to overcome all of those disadvantages. And I'm going to finish with one simple fact. This government makes much of the fact and blames the schools for the fact that we have some of the most unequal outcomes in terms of socioeconomic status, people from the lowest socioeconomic statuses finishing school, doing poorly at school. And they say our schools must do better. And in the OECD, we're among the worst for that figure. We're also among the worst for poverty. And I don't believe that you can fix the schooling problem, the schooling outcomes problem, without fixing the poverty, and we have to stop saying that the schools can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Our third and final speaker is Professor Richard Hatcher. Richard's a Professor of Education at Birmingham City University, and his principal research interests in the analysis of government education policy and how that impacts on the school system. He's got a particular expertise in the role of academies. Richard's also a very active member of the Anti-Academies Alliance and the Campaign for State Education. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, and I should add, an active member of the NUT in Birmingham as well. Now, just got to figure out how this goes on. Right, good. Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm really impressed by how many people have chosen to spend their lunch hour
Thank you.
having a meeting about education. Is tremendous. I was asked to talk particularly about issues to do with academies and local authorities. I've been looking at what the Green Party says about academies and free schools, and it starts off by saying there is a democratic and accountability deficit in academies. And of course that's because the sponsor, whether it's another school or a chain, has control over the school because it controls the governing bodies, and the local authorities have been deprived of any power to influence what happens in those schools. And we know this very well in Birmingham because that's exactly why in a number of our local schools governors were able to abuse their autonomy, and of course it's all come to light in the Trojan Horse affair. The Green Party says also, quite rightly, that free schools, of course, are, if anything, even more democratically unaccountable. And for those reasons, the Green Party, I know you know all this by heart, right? Is opposed to creating more academies. There may be a temporary lapse here and there. The Green Party is opposed to creating more academies and free schools, and will integrate academies and free schools into the local authority system. In fact, it goes further. It says something else very important. It will support campaigns by teachers, parents and communities against academy. That's been very important to us in the NUT because we've been involved in many of those local campaigns. So the policies of the Green Party correspond entirely with those of the National Union of Teachers, and the Green Party is the only mainstream party that actually has those policies. Clap yourselves, that's good. These views, there's a second reason, of course, why we should propose academies, and that is that the research evidence proves conclusively that they are no more effective at raising standards than local authority schools if you compare like with like. And of course that's the government's main reason for academies, apart from the fact they're a step towards privatisation. So their whole policy stands or falls by that evidence, and it falls. Now I'm not going to spend the rest of my time talking about sort of the abuses of the power by academies. What I want to do is to try and fill out the policies of both the NUT and the Green Party on this issue. What would reintegrating academies into a local authority system actually mean? Well, it means a common system of funding and regulation. It means the restructuring of governing bodies of academies so they have the same composition as maintained schools. And it means an end to control of academies by chains. In my view, no school, no state-funded school should be controlled by private organisations. This is not intended as an argument against denominational schools, by the way, which is a separate argument. David Wolf, the education legal expert, has shown that it's not a big legal problem to override funding agreements. It's a matter of political will. Of course, then, if a school wants to continue a relationship with a sponsor, like with any other external organisation, it's free to do so, but not to be controlled by them. And then we'll see how many of these multi-millionaires who like sponsoring schools can retain their enthusiasm when they don't have any power to impose their beliefs. Now, what would a rejuvenated local authority look like? And the Green Party says a number of good things about that in terms of its role in providing places, admissions policies, and so forth. And again, this coincides with the policies of the NUT. And I just want to develop that a little as well. What sort of powers and resources do local authorities, would reconstructed local authorities need? Certainly admissions and provision of school places, but they also need the powers and resources to support schools in addressing problems and intervene effectively in schools which are underperforming, mainly by coordinating and directing and resourcing collaboration among schools, which we know is the most effective way of doing it. And without that central coordination, too often that support among schools is patchy and uneven. Some schools are left behind, so there's a vital role for a local authority there. But I think the role of a local authority has to go beyond supporting schools in difficulties and raising test and exam scores. Because education, as you've heard, is not just about performance in SATs and GCSEs. What the local authority should above all be doing is developing with its teachers and its community a strategic vision for education in its area, a vision for the education of the whole child. And that raises the question of democracy. And I think the basic principle here is this, that every citizen has a stake in the education system in its local society, and therefore should have a say in it. And in fact, I think potentially the most powerful support for progressive policies in education is the mobilisation of parents and the wider community. That doesn't mean them intervening in issues which are properly the professional judgment of teachers, nor does it imply that parents and communities and views are inevitably progressive. In both cases, it's a question of debate, discussion, negotiation, compromise, moving forward together, because you can't move forward on your own without the support of parents and communities. So the question then is, what structure would make that new partnership possible? I've been arguing for some time that the key innovation is local education forums, both at authority-wide level and at more local level, perhaps a small town or an urban district, that enable people to come together and discuss the issues of education that matter to them. So I was interested to see in the Plunkett review that the Labour Party has recently produced, that it has a similar proposal, and it's important because hopefully it won't be the Conservatives who win the next election. And we should be, in that case, looking to Labour to implement a policy where it says, we will widen civic participation in education policy making through local education panels, which will comprise representatives of teachers, parents, other school workers, local community, and councillors. And these would have the task of developing a long-term strategic plan for education, oversee commissioning decisions, and agree the budget. Now, I think that sounds pretty like my notion of local education forum, and I think that's a positive development. Unfortunately, in the Plunkett review, it's mixed up with another idea, which is not a very good one, which is that local, what they call directors of school standards, should be imposed on each local authority area. To me, they sound too much like they're the arms of the Secretary of State for Education. And all their functions are unnecessary. They could all be carried out by democratised local authorities with the oversight of HMI to ensure that things work okay. Okay. 1 minute, so my final point is this. Local education forums would provide that opportunity for that sort of debate and partnership that we want, but we need to do more than that. If we want a more democratic and participatory local school system, we also have to open up the cabinet and scrutiny system that operates in most local authorities. In my view, it is deeply undemocratic because it excludes virtually all public and professional input into where the key decisions at local authority level are taken. In my view, the education scrutiny committees, and I've been on one as a representative for the NUT in Birmingham for a while, and so I see how they work. They should be opened up to representation and input from that local education panel that Labour's talking about, that local education forum that I described. And similarly, I mean, you know, in Birmingham, where does the we have 76 Labour councillors. Where does the responsibility for education lie? With one person. There is no education committee, just like in most authorities. It means that one person is actually very vulnerable to the influence of officers rather than the democratic will. So again, I would like to see education committees established to support the local cabinet member for education, and with the involvement not just of councillors, but of lay members, of representatives elected from that wider local education forum or panel. So I hope these ideas find an echo in the debate as it continues, both within my own union and within the Green Party, because I think they fit very well with the way that you see and we see the way forward for our school system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you to all of our speakers. Now it's over to you. We've got about half an hour, so I think we'll take questions